Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to 14 Divine Guides. We are looking at the life of Imam Al-Sajjad. Peace and salutations be upon him, Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam. And in our previous episode, we looked at 3 dimensions to the biography of the Holy Imam. Peace and salutations be upon him. And we were joined, and we are still joined by Al-Hajj Ghulam Abbas Laka, who inspired us in the first episode on the life of the Imam Salamullahi alayh, and as mentioned by himself, that we will not do justice to the biography of the Imam even if we done an infinity number of episodes, but we are doing our best to please Allah, and inshallah we can take practical lessons from the life of the Imam. Peace and salutations be upon him. When I first discussed this show with Al-Hajj Ghulam Abbas, he mentioned dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq to myself, and how we can take practical lessons living in the West in the 21st century, because sometimes we read this dua during certain times during the year and we don't actually take lessons from this dua. So inshallah in the next 2 episodes we will try and look at that dua, inshallah try set some light into that. Just before we go into this dua, just from the last show we spoke about the sermon of Imam Al-Sajjad in Ash-Sham. Inshallah we ended up speaking about the Imam, the way he started the sermon. Inshallah, just before looking at this dua, we'll start with that. Before that, I welcome you, Hajj Ghulam Abbas. Thank you again for joining us, and inshallah we can benefit from your knowledge.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. All praises to Allah, the Creator of the universes and the Sustainer, the Provider of believers and non-believers. And may His choicest blessings be on the last of His prophets, the seal of His messengers and His holy progeny. And in particular, may His incessant blessings ever continue on this illustrious great-grandson of the Holy Prophet, on Imam al-Abidin alayhi salam, salawatullahi alayhi. Thank you for your kind invitation and for the opportunity to reflect upon the Imam alayhi salam. The teachings of the Imam are vast and deep. And when we look at how we may be able to benefit from a 21st century point of view, the personal development of his teachings from du'as are particularly pertinent today. But we have to look through a lens at the biography of the Imam alayhi salam. And the lens that he has given us to look at his life is the lens of Karbala. And his ambassadorial responsibilities about Karbala in Kufa, Damascus, reaching us today in 21st century Britain. And when we consider the pressure that was placed upon him and the Ahlulbayt of Islam to extinguish the light of the Ahlulbayt, it makes us wonder, because it's burning brightly for us today, illuminating the darkness in our life. How did that happen? And that question is important, because we get a sense of how Yazid tried to extinguish that light, but the very infrastructure of the Islamic teachings that keep it alive. Because in the court of Yazid in Damascus, when the Imam al-Islam was making an eloquent speech that was resulting in the congregation and the delegates from around the world there being shocked, Yazid wanted to silence him. And so, in order to do so, even though it wasn't Salah time at the time, he got his muazzin to start the azan. And the Imam alayhi salam, seeing this, allowed it to continue, because in his mastery was able to use that to his advantage. Because when the muazzin began, he of course, after proclaiming the greatness of Allah and the unity of Allah, then went on to say, I testify that Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. At this point, the Imam alayhi salam took off his turban and he said, "O Muazzin, I beseech you in the name of this very Muhammad to be quiet." And he turns to Yazid and he says, "Oh Yazid, now imagine the scene here. You've got delegates from around the world brought, because at that time the Islamic Empire was vast and powerful. There were delegates from Rome that had come, from the Byzantine Empire. So there were all these people there. Here was a captive, supposedly an ordinary young man captive, but he was far from ordinary. He was a luminous Imam, in chains, addressing the Caliph at the time, saying to him, 'Oh Yazid, is this great and magnanimous prophet your grandfather or our grandfather? If you say he is your grandfather, then everybody here will know you're telling a lie. If you say he is my grandfather, then tell me, how is it that you murdered my father, plundered his property, and made his women captives?' At that point, there was turmoil in the court. When people say that Imam al-Abidin avoided politics, we need to understand very clearly that Imam al-Islam fulfilled his political leadership as an Imam. But he did it in a very skillful way. He didn't use political office. He used spiritual leadership as a way to politically awaken the people. And it is said that the ambassador from Rome stood up and he said to Yazid that if what this young man is saying is true, then shame upon you. Because my community respects me and indeed respects the dust on my shoes, because I'm a distant descendant of David, the great prophet David, Dawood. How can you murder the grandson of the Holy Prophet and take his family captives? Shame upon you. At which point Yazid tried to have him assassinated straight away. But the message for us is, when we want to engage in spiritual practice, including the salah, when we say Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, it should be a wake-up call for us as to what does this mean with regard to the way in which we engage practically, personally, spiritually with the message and the sacrifice of the family of the Holy Prophet. Because that sets the context to all the teachings that come thereafter.
Thank you very much, Haji. And as we mentioned in the first part, if it wasn't for Sayyida Zainab, peace and salutations be upon her, and Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam, then Karbala would have stayed in Karbala. Indeed. And they held the flag. Inshallah, we'll touch upon this, the mournings of Imam al-Hussein and the spread of the message. And as you mentioned, we can look at Karbala through Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq. We mentioned Sahif Al-Sajjadiyya before we start to look at the dua itself, Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq. What is Sahif Al-Sajjadiyya? I know that's a very wide question and you'll probably end up using the whole show, but to try and explain, what is the Sahif Al-Sajjadiyya that we have with us?
The Sahifa is an integral component of what it means to be a human being. It is the thread that weaves together the fabric of the message of Islam. And it is the bridge by which we connect to the light of the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny. When we look at how our scholars have referred to this text, they've placed it in an amazing context, in a three-dimensional context. The first being the Quran al-Nazil, the revealed Quran that we have. The words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the verses from Surah Rum, chapter 30, verse 8, that we looked at, which said, أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكُّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, did not reflect upon themselves. Resulting in the next two parts of this three-dimensional model, Al-Quran al-Natiq, the spoken Quran, which is, of course, the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam. We have the Hadith al-Thaqalain, which is, mutawatir. It is very strong. There's an unbroken chain of narration. from the Holy Prophet saying, I'm leaving two precious things behind, the Book of Allah and my Ahlulbayt. The two shall not separate from one another until they come to me at the fountain of Kawthar. Now, the sources of this, we know this hadith. But when we look at the sources of this, it's interesting. I don't need to cite you Shia sources. If we look at sources that are accepted by the vast majority of Muslims. Al-Tirmidhi in his Sahih, volume 5. If we look at As-Suyuti in Ad-Durr al-Manthur, volume 6. And there are various other sources as well that narrate this. So that the spoken word of the Ahlul Bayt is the Quran al-Natiq, the speaking Quran. Of course, as exemplified by Imam Ali alayhi salam. And then we have the third aspect, the Quran al-Sa'id, the rising Quran, from the Arabic root Sa'ada. Because this Quran al-Sa'id is our response to the Quran al-Nazil. So that when a human being is, when the heart of a human being is met with the scriptural revelation, what happens? What should happen? What can happen? What ought to happen? That is the Sahifa. Because that is our rising response to divinity. This is why it has been called a Quran al-Sa'id. And when we look at, excuse me, one of the great scholars of recent times, Imam Khomeini, in his last will and testimony, it's interesting actually, it's worth reading just as a piece of historical record. In his will, he says, we are honored that we have the life-giving supplications that are called Quran al-Sa'id, the ascending Quran, from the infallible Imams. And he's referring to Sayf al-Sajjadiyah. This is Sayf al-Sajjadiyah. It is life-giving to those who open their hearts to it. And this is why it is also referred to as the sister of the Quran, because it allows us to reflect upon the verses of the Quran and respond back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the words of one of his awliya, one of his chosen, beloved, purified servants.
Ahsantum Haji. Alhamdulillah, I had the honor of reading Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq in Bayt al-Haram, in near the Kaaba. So and I think even though I had read it before, that was sort of my first, because it was a few of the brothers and sisters in a small group, to sort of reflect upon this dua by Imam Al-Sajjad salamullahi alayhi. Before we look at it, why Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq is the question. Why are we looking at this particular dua? What makes it different to the many other du'as, like even Abu Hamza al-Thamali?
Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq is the heart of the Sayf al-Sajjadiyah, according to many scholars. When we look at the commentary tradition, the reception history of the Sayf al-Sajjadiyah, as we discussed last time, it varies from the earliest commentaries. In fact, the earliest commentary that we have is from Muhammad ibn Idris al-Hilli, the uncle of Allama Hilli, the famous jurist. And his commentary was just a glossary of words being defined in the margins. And then Kafami, who came many, many years later, quoting Hilli, following the same tradition. But then later, we had deep analytical exegesis of the Sahifa, in particular Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq, through people like Sayyid Ali Khan, Madani Shirazi, and other scholars who came after him, right the way through to modern times. We have Sayyid Muhammad Taqi Falsafi, who wrote 3 volumes as a commentary just on this one Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq. But why Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq? Because akhlaq is what Islam is all about. Akhlaq is not just good manners, that's adab. Akhlaq is about what it means to experience being. It is the corollary, from a spiritual point of view, of being a human being. It can go to the essence of what we're all about. And therefore, it's the essence of Islam. How do we say that? Because the one who brought Islam made that clear to us. Because the Holy Prophet, peace upon him and his holy progeny, said very clearly in a famous hadith, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. That surely I have been sent for the development of character, for Makarim Al-Akhlaq, for personal development. Personal development is not a modern 21st century concept. Personal development is Makarim Al-Akhlaq. It goes to the heart of the Islamic message. And the source that I'm using for this hadith is Mustadrak al-Wasail in volume 2. But if we take this seriously, this teaching of the Holy Prophet, that إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that this is what I've been brought for, then akhlaq is the essence of Islam. How do we learn about akhlaq? Through dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq. This is why this dua is incredibly important, and this is why we recite it on the night of Qadr. Because we can't recite the whole of Sayfa Sajjadiyah. Now, why the night of Qadr? That's an important question. Why do we recite this particular dua? Of all the duas out there, why recite this one? Well, one of the reasons could be that this is the night of Qadr, 23rd Ramadan, according to our teachings. The holy month of Ramadan is the night when the Quran was revealed. Al-Quran al-Nazil. So what do we? We recite the Quran, and of course we recite the heart of the Quran, Surah Yasin. And we also therefore respond to this revelation on that night. We have the Quran aside, the Sayfa Sajjadiyah, and we recite the heart of the Quran aside, we recite Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq. So that our hearts respond to the divine scriptural teachings of the Holy Quran by responding with this dua. To set our hearts in the path of personal development on that night in which our destiny for the rest of the year is shaped. Tells us something about why this dua has been given the importance that it does. And because we recite it as one of the recommended amals on the night of Qadr, it tells us it is not just something special for Ramadan. It is something special for every day that we've been given life.
If we can, in the next 3 minutes before the first break, try and look at maybe one example of practical personal development from this dua, which is only 4 pages. Of course, if you don't have Sahif al-Sajjadiyah, you can find the dua in Mafatih al-Janan, for those of you that want to read the dua.
Well, in a word, it works from inside out. This is the beauty of it. It's really practical personal development that is theologically conditioned. And what I mean by that is, it is rooted in our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it covers all the different dimensions of what it means to be a human being. And inshallah, in our next discussion, in a few minutes' time, inshallah, we'll be able to look at specific practical examples of different areas of our life. But essentially, it is about our self-analysis. It is a response to that invocation in Surah Rum, do they not reflect upon themselves. It allows us to look at a set of mirrors, to analyze different aspects of ourselves. And this is why when we look at the very beginning of it, it begins with salawat. And Sheikh Tusi in Amali Volume 1 quotes Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, when one of you begins to pray, you should start this dua with salawat, because salawat is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah will not filter one aspect of a supplication and edit out the rest. It is beneath His magnanimity. This is why Imam al-Abidin al-Islam begins this Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq with a salawat, which also links back to the point we made about Karbala and his speech in Damascus. Because when he said to the muazzin, when the time of azan came, and he said, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, setting in place the importance of the Holy Prophet, so too in Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq does the Imam begin with that, with salawat, sending blessings upon the Holy Prophet and his progeny. So that our entry into this discussion of personal development is through the door of blessings. So that each step in that journey may be blessed. And we may have a safe passage through the various discussions into this.
Thank you very much, Haji Ghulam Abbas. Inshallah, we will be going for a short break, and inshallah you can join us after a short while. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to 14 Divine Guides. We are joined by Al-Hajj Ghulam Abbas Laka, looking at 21st century akhlaq from the dua of Makarim Al-Akhlaq, which is found in Sahih Al-Sajjad, or as mentioned in Mafatih Al-Janan, a dua that's usually read on Laylatul Qadr, but of course can be read any other time. It's interesting that you mentioned the ayah from Surah Al-Rum, and the Surah Al-Rum is another surah that we read on Laylatul Qadr, yes. Subhanallah. And in the first episode we mentioned about trying to know yourself. In this, inshallah, discussion we'll try and look at practical personal development from this dua, and if you can give us a few examples that we can look at.
Inshallah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the structure of personal development in the dua begins with encouraging us to look within. So it's an inside-out approach to personal development, and then looks at applying it to how we relate to the world and dealing with our anxieties, our problems, our stresses, as well as how we relate to other people. So it's got a multifaceted approach. But if we look at the opening structure of this, the psychology of the dua, it's set out in the first stanza, where the Imam says, praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَبَلِّغْ بِإِيمَانِ أَكْمَلَ الْإِيمَانِ, cause my faith to reach the most perfect of faith. Now when you analyze this grammatically, and the commentaries of dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq really spend a lot of time on this, this idea of وَبَلِّغْ bi, this grammatical structure, saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, cause my faith to reach this level. So it's like taking it there. So it's not, if I have faith, it's because of how good I am. No, it's because it's a gift from you. So straight away, from a practical point of view, he is sparing himself the problems of pride, of arrogance, of all the pitfalls that we face from that, by saying, you cause my faith to get there, and rooting his experience as a human being in faith. Then he continues, the linked aspect to faith is intention. He said, وَجْعَلْ يَقِينِ أَفْضَلَ الْيَقِينِ, and make my before we go on to the aspect of intention. But just fortifying the aspect of faith, taking faith to the level of certainty, of yaqeen, and take my certainty to the most excellent level of certainty. So that you've got faith, iman, which comes from amana, peace, where a person has experiences a peace in their own conscience. In a very practical way, they experience peace about being sure about something. But then there's a distinction between iman and yaqeen.
Certainty.
Exactly. And the Imam Al-Islam have given many teachings on the distinction between iman and yaqeen. But even within yaqeen, even within the certainty of faith, there are grades. So the Imam is beginning in a very practical sense, where am I? What state of being am I at? What is my level of faith? What is my level of commitment and relation to you, O Allah? And you cause it to go to the best level. This is where we have the opportunity to really think about where we're practically at. And this is where, Hajj every year is a good example of this. And we do this physically in a very practical way. When we for example, do sa'i, and when we go from Safa to Marwa, looking at that struggle of Bibi Hajra alayhi salam, that faith being a struggle, but you need to have faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deliver. It may take longer than you had ever hoped.
But it will come.
And it may come in a different way
that you did not expect.
Exactly. And this is where, Surah Safat, Surah 37, Ayah 109, says, Salamun ala Ibrahim. Peace upon Ibrahim. Very few people in the Quran have had this accolade, Salamun ala Ibrahim. It's because of the yaqeen that he demonstrated in Allah. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, in his commentaries of the distinction between iman and yaqeen, and my source is Mustadrak al-Wasail, says that yaqeen is greater than iman, and there is nothing more important than yaqeen. In another teaching, he says, when God wants to give blessings to a person, He makes him understand the religion and inspires him with yaqeen. So from a practical personal development point of view, if we really want to develop ourselves, we need to begin by striving for yaqeen. We need to look at the self-analysis. We need to look at what is my level of faith, really. And one simple barometer is how stressed and anxious we are in life.
Stressful times, yes.
So when we are really stressed and really anxious about life, it's like a mirror saying, this is a measure of how weak your faith is as a person.
And how much certainty you have that something will happen.
This is why the Imam opens up his discussion on personal development
with this
with iman, yaqeen, and the gradation of yaqeen. Yaqeen being like a volume dial, not like a light switch on and off, but like a dimmer switch. You can get brighter and brighter and brighter.
Your yaqeen can increase.
Exactly, exactly. And then we come to the psychology of intention. We get to this idea, the spiritual transformation of motivation. A lot of personal development material talks about motivation being key. When we look at business books, you know, the motivated leader, the motivated manager. Well, yes. When we look at sports psychology, the motivation of somebody to go and win a gold medal at the Olympics. Well, what about the Olympics of spirituality? What about the, you know, the gold medal for akhlaq in terms of being at that level of personal development? The Imam has a lot to say about that. Because that is based upon motivation and it's based upon niyyah. That's what niyyah is, intention. And his words, وَانْتَهِ بِالنِّيَّةِ إِلَىٰ أَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ. Beautiful. Take my intention, وَانْتَهِ بِالنِّيَّةِ, my intention, إِلَىٰ to ahsan, to the best, أَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ, to the best of intentions. Again, setting in place the principle that when we purify our intention, when we fortify our motivation, it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, preventing the illness, the spiritual illness of arrogance to seep into our hearts. And it's very easy for that to happen, and it can happen all the time because shaitan keeps trying to do that. This is why we need to keep replenishing and rejuvenating our connection with this dua. Because it allows us to keep wiping that mirror clean so that we can keep seeing and purifying aspects that we see within ourselves.
We've got many narrations that allude to the intention of oneself.
Yes,
exactly. And the Imam alludes to the intention, or to be the best of intentions. Because sometimes you might do something, your deed might be good, but your intention wasn't maybe, I don't know, to show off or of arrogance. You did that deed.
Exactly. So, there's the famous tradition of the Holy Prophet, which is actually in two parts. The first part is well known, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that surely actions are dependent upon their niyyat, their intention. But then the second part is really intention. It says, وَلِكُلِّ إِمْرٍ مَا نَوَى, that everyone will gain according to their intention. Therefore, when we look at actions, again, staying with Mustadrak al-Wasail as the source, volume 1, the hadith of the Holy Prophet is, when he was comparing a rich man and a poor man, it was saying that if the rich man uses his wealth in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gets reward. But if the poor man intends to do that, if he had wealth, just the purity of his intention can achieve for him the same reward as the first person who actually had the physical wealth. This is why in the spiritual realm, we can create, through the power of intention, a reality that is different to the physical events that happen in our lives. We can transcend our physical limitations through the power of purity of intention. So from a practical point of view, if we are feeling very worthless, strengthening our motivation to do that which inspires us is, from a practical personal development point of view, is very important. Because it's asked the question, what inspires me? Which in itself helps us get ourselves up from a rut. Secondly, empowers us to be able to seek help from Allah, to be able to go in that way. And thirdly, then we can use the power of intention. And even things that ostensibly look unspiritual can become spiritual. In Mizan al-Hikmah in volume 10, the Holy Prophet is narrated to have said that people saw a powerful man, and somebody said, oh, we wish he used this power and wealth in the way of Allah. And the Holy Prophet responded to these people not to be judgmental. He said that if his work is for his children, for his parents, thirdly for an honorable life for himself, or fourthly, of course, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the power of intention is incredibly subtle. And this is where it can help us purify our own actions and our own personal development. And this is where, again, in Mizan al-Hikmah, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, is narrated to have said, يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ عَلَى نِيَّتِهِمْ, that on that day of judgment, people will be called according to their niyyat.
But sometimes, and again relating to the 21st century here in the West, my intention maybe is to reach somewhere or to gain something, but sometimes it can be demotivating because I have the intention, but I don't actually reach where I want to be.
Yes.
And then I fail once or twice or three times, then it makes it harder now to
Yes.
gain what I want.
Exactly right. And this is where, from a psychological point of view, the verse of Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq is very powerful, because it talks about وَانْتَهِي بِنِيَّتِي إِلَىٰ أَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ. Take my intention to the best of intentions. So what he's really talking about is the niyyah of niyyah. He's talking about, give me the strength to make my niyyah strong, so that I may have initially had intention at one level, I tried, it didn't work out, I'm demotivated. You strengthen my niyyah to fortify my motivation. So it's about setting in place our niyyah of our niyyah, our intention to become more motivated. Changes our relationship with events. This is why it's so practical and so powerful, because it separates our well-being, our mental health, from the things that happen. We can try and fail, okay. But we can either become demoralized about that, or we can fortify and rejuvenate our intention by going back to this verse, by strengthening, taking to ahsan al-niyat, our motivation for a particular action that we want to perform.
Thank you very much. If we can carry on with try, and we've spent over 15 minutes just on 3 lines, let alone 3 pages we have to go. How else does this dua give us more development, sort of maybe even know ourselves or to better ourselves?
Application. So in our previous discussions, we've been talking about how we can apply this. So let's stop and do that for a moment. And there are 3 ways we can do that. Firstly, each day, let us make it a practice. You know, people go to the gym every morning.
Correct.
To work out their bodily muscles.
How do you work out your spiritual?
How do we give a workout to the muscle of niyyah, to the muscle of intention? How do we strengthen this practice, this faculty of forming an intention? This is where in the morning, you know, with our Fajr Salah, let us strengthen our niyyah of niyyah. Let us strengthen our motivation of being motivated in the way of Allah, so that we can be energized. And we then have a new and a fresh approach to our daily actions. So for instance, let's say we are incredibly busy and we have no time for any extra prayers. We just do what is obligatory. But if we change our niyyah, for example, one of the commentaries of this verse, وَانْتَهِ بِالنِّيَّةِ الْأَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ, by Sayyid Ali Khan, quotes Mullah Mohsin Faid al-Kashani. And in his text about niyyah, he talks about how you can transform the ordinary into the sublime. By, for instance, you need to eat. You've got to spend time eating. But if your motivation, if your niyyah is to just eat to fulfill your bodily needs, you get some level of benefit. But if your intention is to strengthen yourself in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then not only do you get the physical benefit, you also get spiritual benefit. So you get to multitask. So we can think about how can we multitask in our daily lives by changing our intention. Imam Ali alayhi salam, the master of psychology in Dua Kumal, has a verse, قَوِّي عَلَى خِدْمَتِكَ جَوَارِهِ. Strengthen قَوِّي عَلَى خِدْمَتِكَ, in your service, جَوَارِهِ, my physical body. Similarly, when we apply this in the morning, let's do it. Let's think about how can we be fresh in our approach. And another way is to begin our working day by sending salams to the Imam of our time. Because then, even though we may have an administrative boss to whom we are answerable, we are ultimately in the service of the Imam of our time, who is the representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we get to shift our work, whether we are, administrators, lawyers, doctors, whatever that practice may be to earn an honest livelihood, actually becomes spiritual practice. Through وَانْتَهِي بِالنِّيَّةِ لَأَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ. This is the exercising the muscle of strengthening, evolving, improving our niyyah to take it to ahsan al-niyyat. Secondly, let us actually be clear about something that really inspires us. How many people sleepwalk through life without really realizing what are they really about? What mark do I want to leave on this world? Because I've been given particular talents and attributes. Each of us have. So when we talk about ourselves, we may think, oh, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that, I don't have this, I don't have that. Yes, that may be true. But what about the things that we do have? What about the opportunities that we do have? Because there is asraf, there is wastage, not just of the food on our plates that we tell our children. There's asraf of opportunity, there's asraf of talent, there's asraf of time, there is asraf of awareness. So when we fortify our niyyah, our intention, it transforms our actions and our experience of being a human being. This is the legacy of Imam al-Abidin alayhi salam. That when we look at his biography, he encourages us to do the self-reflection, and we can do it as a practice in the morning. What are my intentions for this day? How can I strengthen my motivation through the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And recognizing that niyyah is a gift, so that we can be clear in our seeking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of blessing us with niyyah. Wantahi bi niyyati la ahsani niyyat. Take my niyyah to the best of niyyat. So that we don't take this idea of intention lightly. The psychology of motivation in Islam is profound. We recognize that whatever motivation we have to do something is a gift. So we can be thankful about this gift. And this idea of gratitude is replete in the Makarim Al-Akhlaq. Inshallah, we will look at that when we consider the external dimensions of the dua. But just on the internal side, on the motivation side, it's incredibly powerful. And then that leads on to the third dimension. So we've got faith, we've got intention, and then action.
If you don't mind, we'll have to skip to action onto the third part because we have come up to the end of this part. And I was just going to mention that it's amazing that after all the trials and tribulations of the Imam throughout Karbala, that he can come up with lines like this. So some people might find hardship or might think, I can't have an intention to do this, or I don't have time. Just look at Imam Al-Sajjad and what he went through, and he can do this. And
these
I think
practical
that these
lived
are
words.
Practical lived words from the Imams. He's not saying living a comfortable life. No, he, as you mentioned, we have in history the Imam. Till his last few years, the marks of the change were seen, and he couldn't sit in one position for a very long time. He had to change position because of the pain he had gone through during Sham. But we have sadly come to the end of the second part of this show. Inshallah, we will be going for a short break. Join us after this short break. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to 14 Divine Guides. If you've just joined us, we are looking at Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq and trying to pick up lessons of akhlaq for ourselves. We've looked at working from inside out, and we've also looked at building our motivation through our intention. And now to the action part, which is sometimes the most difficult part, I would say, maybe for myself, because sometimes the intention is there and the plan is there, but once it comes to actually implementing a certain goal that I had with regards to serving Allah, it can be difficult, especially, I would say, living here in London. We live such a routine life, especially if you've got a Monday 9-to-5 job. You live in such a sort of robot way, so it's difficult to actually implement what you have sort of intended for in the beginning.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The challenge of personal development is how can we bring the sublime into the mundane? How can we change our ritual into spiritual enlightenment? How can we change ritual practice into spiritual enlightenment and experience that? The Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq helps us do that, because it allows us to look at action in the context of faith and intention. So that actions are not taken in isolation, but they're taken within the context of the intention and the faith with which they were done. This is why the Imam alayhi salam, having begun the dua by looking at iman, faith, yaqeen, certainty of faith, niyyah, intention, then says, وَبِعَمَلِي إِلَى أَحْسَنِ الْأَعْمَالِ, and take my actions to the best of actions. But we must take heart that no matter how small our actions may be, if we do it with a purity of intention, then that can serve as a very powerful vehicle for our spiritual progress. Our spiritual progress is not contingent upon doing great, impressive works. It's about doing work with purity of intention. That is the real jihad. That is the real work that the teachers of the Ahlulbayt TV really warn us about. Because we need to work hard, but we need to do so with the purity of intention. So that if we go to work and we may be in a fixed routine, if we change the niyyah with which we do that work, that mundane practice can itself become our spiritual worship. So for instance, in Safinatul Bihar in volume 1, Imam Ali alayhi salam is narrated to have said, all of our actions are riyah, are just pride and showing off, except those which are done with a pure niyyah, with a pure intention. Purity of action is a vulnerable thing, which one has to monitor until he dies. This is a very powerful warning from Imam Ali alayhi salam, that when it comes to our actions, we shouldn't be focusing on doing great things that people will think, oh wow, how amazing. We should focus on doing things, whether big or small, with great purity of intention. That should be the essence of our focus. And that self-analysis, that inner work, allows us to really purify whatever little action we do. And this is where the dua encourages us to reflect upon where our deficiencies are. So when you look a few lines down, he says, وَصَحِّحْ بِمَا إِنْدَكَ يَقِينِي, and rectify my yaqeen, my certainty, through that which is with you. Try and fix the holes, the problems, the weaknesses in my faith. but asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do that. So straight away we are acknowledging that my faith is not perfect, there are weaknesses, there are holes, which automatically get us to think about where are the weaknesses. And then, having identified the weaknesses, we can seek Allah's help in strengthening that. Now, if we do that as a practice, as a daily practical practice, just thinking about what is the state of my iman today? Simple question. We can do it while we're commuting to work. It doesn't have to be a separate thing. We can multitask. We can become more efficient in our use of time. But that question can really change our experience of the rest of the day. And this is where Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and this is from Al-Kafi in volume 2, says one of Hazrat Luqman, the famous wise prophet, one of his recommendations to his son, the wisdom of Luqman, he says that on the day of judgment, there are 4 questions that you'll be asked. He's saying to his son, how did you spend your youth? So what are the actions, what are the intentions that we were cultivating in our youth? Secondly, how did you spend your life, the rest of your life? Thirdly, how did you gain your wealth? And fourthly, how did you spend your wealth? These are all questions that are grounded upon our purity of action. And this is where this idea was sahih bima indaka yaqini. So asking Allah to rectify, to fix the problems that are in our yaqeen. And then the Imam continues in this dua, وَاسْتَصْلِحْ بِقُدْرَتِكَ مَا فَسَدَ مِنِّي. And set right, again, we will fix, وَاسْتَصْلِحْ.
Fix.
Exactly, improve, fix the damage of that which is corrupt in me through your power. So we are acknowledging that there is corruption within us. That's incredibly powerful. Because then it asks us to look and say, where is the corruption within us? And this introspection is an important first dimension of Makarim Al-Akhlaq, the internal dimension. Inshallah, in the next show, we'll look at the external dimension, how we take all this internal analysis out into the wider world, how we engage with the world, how we relate to people, how we're able to deal with adversity. But it begins inside out. It begins with the internal work of looking at what is that internal corruption that needs to be rectified. And this is where using Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq as a regular mirror in which we look can be incredibly powerful and indeed also liberating. Because it forces us to look at various practical aspects that we may not otherwise be thinking about.
But how, sorry to interrupt you, how can one, if we mentioned, measuring your yaqeen or your iman, and we said that, you can look at yourself through hard times and know where your iman is, but maybe sometimes that's difficult to do because maybe you're living a routine life where you don't have time or you don't look at yourself in the mirror and say, my iman. How can one always judge his iman or know where his iman level is or where his yaqeen is, his certainty is, if he's living such a robotic sort of lifestyle?
By doing what the Quran asks us to do, which is that أَوَلَّمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, does not reflect upon themselves. Now this reflection doesn't need to take much time.
It can be something just before you sleep.
It can be very efficient. So we know the teaching of the 6th Imam al-Islam that we should audit everything that we've done
before we sleep.
During the day before we sleep. But we can also get into practices and disciplines at the beginning of the day. Just as people do a little exercise in the morning to strengthen our body for that day, we can also strengthen our mind by looking at what is the state of our being. So for example, we have the practice of reciting certain du'as in the morning, for example, after Fajr dua. And we begin by saying in that dua, وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, that I entrust my affairs to Allah. Well, do we really? Really? Because we need to ask ourselves, well, how much peace do I feel? Because this idea from Surah Yasin, Salamun qawlan min Rabbir Rahim, this idea of peace, of salam, is incredibly important in the Islamic teachings. So we ask ourselves, how much peace do I feel this morning? Am I really stressed and worried about what's coming up? Straight away, we have a barometer of where we are in our yaqeen, where we are in our faith. That's not something to get depressed about. It's not something to beat ourselves up about.
No.
It's an opportunity to ask for help. وَانْتَهِ بِنِيَّةِ الْأَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ وَبَلِّغْ بِإِيمَانِي إِلَى أَكْمَلِ الْإِيمَانِ. This is where the dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq can become like a crutch for a lame person. Who amongst us is not spiritually crippled? Who amongst us does not need the crutch of dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq to support us?
That's what Imam Al-Sajjad did on the day of Ashura. He left all his affairs to Allah. You can imagine everything happening, and that he done exactly what is mentioned in the dua.
Exactly. This is why when you look at Karbala through the lens of the Makarim Al-Akhlaq, I mean, what you see is just inspiring. For instance, when we talk about Afdal al-Yaqeen, this pinnacle of Yaqeen, you see it in the dua that Imam Hussein alayhi salam recited at Fajr time on the day of Ashura. Because when you look at the dua, and again, these duas, a lot of them come to us through Imam al-Abidin alayhi salam. When the thousands of soldiers were arrayed against the few companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he looks at the army and he says to Allah, even though the enemies are numerous and the friends are few, I have confidence, I have faith in you and your support, and I entrust my affairs to you. It's an opportunity for us, because we, in these days of stress, we feel we're alone. We feel we've got institutions against us. We've got people against us. We may have our bosses against us. We may have our families against us. We may have society against us. We're not alone. We're never alone. The sense of loneliness, of this wahshat, that people talk about, especially in the first night of the grave, this idea of loneliness in this life is a work of shaitan. It is shaitan creating a distance between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why when we feel stress, we should know that actually we are separated from Allah. Stress is a good thing. It is our friend, because it is our warner. It is a truthful, faithful warner of the state of our yaqeen. And it is an invitation to ask Allah's help to strengthen our faith. Now, from a psychological point of view, when we're in the trenches, when we're dealing with a mortgage payment that we're struggling to pay, when we get the mail in the morning and we are petrified about what the postman will bring today, which red letters will come through the mail today, final notice payments. As we open that letter and we are worried about how little there is in the bank, we have choices at that time. We can open that letter in loneliness, or we can open that letter with faith. It's a very simple choice, but an incredibly difficult choice. Simple doesn't mean simplistic. Mm-hmm. What the dua is talking about is very simple, but it is profound. Profound. This is why in the good days, when our life is stable, we need to do this exercise. We need to strengthen the muscle, so that in the times when we need to lift the weights of adversity, our muscle is strong enough to do it. We don't collapse under the weight of adversity, but our spiritual muscle is strong enough to bear that adversity. And we can talk to our Christian friends about this principle of tawakkul in Islam through, for example, the prayer of Saint Augustine, the famous Christian monk, who said, "Pray not for a lighter load, but for stronger shoulders." What greater load could there have been than that upon the shoulders of Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura? This is where, when we talk about in Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq, وَانْتَهِي بِنِيَّةِ لَأَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ وَبَلِّغْ بِإِيمَانِي إِلَى أَكْمَلِ الْإِيمَانِ, preceding that. These are all building blocks of that strength, that inner strength, that allows us to deal with the outer challenges practically, decisively, peacefully. But it comes from within. But it has to be a daily practice.
Even
the Olympic gold medalist doesn't just turn up on the day of the finals, does it? How can we therefore expect to just turn up to the days of adversity if we haven't put in the requisite spiritual training? And this is where we need to seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us, even though our training program is weak and we are lazy in our practice. He, through His compassion, can strengthen us, and through our niyyah, strengthen our motivation and improve the ability that we have to deal with the adversity that we face. And inshallah, we will look at 3 or 4 specific adversities that we face and verses from Dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq that we can utilize to deal with each of those kinds of adversities, inshallah.
Inshallah, and as you mentioned, I think with practical practices that you can pick up, I think even though you mentioned that sometimes we don't have time, but an extra prayer is always helpful. Even like, for example, sometimes they say there's the nafila of Salat al-Subh before, and if you practice this, pray this nafila 2 rak'ahs before you pray Salat al-Subh, and then you will see a difference in your Salat al-Subh.
Yes. Because
sometimes you're half asleep praying the Salat al-Subh. So once you pray the nafila, half asleep, the Salat al-Subh, you'll be sort of awake. So small practices, or as you mentioned, even sending salutations to the Imam of your time, which only takes a few seconds. Inshallah, we can. And I think this all comes with practice. But once you've practiced, then you sort of come at a stage where you're at a low. It won't feel like you're at a low because you've got some sort of yaqeen behind you.
This is where, when we look at the practical psychology of the Makarim Al-Akhlaq, it's incredibly powerful. If you look at modern psychology, if you look at teachings of cognitive behavior therapy or mindfulness-based cognitive behavior therapy, a lot of it is about being aware, not just of what we think, but how we think. And this process of becoming aware of how we are thinking changes our experience of our thoughts. So that when negative thoughts come in, it doesn't necessarily have to have a negative experience. It can just be like clouds. So that, as experts in psychology say, thoughts can be to the mind, just as clouds are to the sky. Clouds pass. Just as sound is to the ear. The ear doesn't get hung up about a particular sound. Sound comes, sound moves. The sky doesn't get traumatized by a dark cloud passing. It just passes through. Similarly, when a dark thought, a stressful thought passes through over the canvas of our mind, we don't need to become attached to it. We can have the strength to be mindful that this is just a process of thinking. And thoughts can become independent of our being. And that is not just a theoretical statement, but it has the practical power when we are feeling really depressed. And a lot of modern surveys show that 1 in 5 adults in the UK at any point in time suffer depression. In fact, the surveys say it could be higher because men tend to underreport depression.
Correct.
One of the maintenance cycles, as they call it, of depression is rumination, of thinking again and again over bad things that happen, reliving in our minds those bad experiences. This dua can help us break the cycle of rumination by forcing us to engage in self-reflection and recognizing the processes of how we are thinking, not just what we are thinking. And this is where the simple verse, وَانْتَهِي بِنِيَّةِ لَأَحْسَنِ النِّيَّاتِ, looking at the niyyah of niyyah, our intention of strengthening our intention, our motivation, can change that experience. And when we feel stressed, it's our body and our hearts telling us that it's a wake-up call to re-examine the faith that we have. This is why the dua begins, وَبَلِّغْ بِإِيمَانِي أَكْمَلَ الْإِيمَانِ.
Ahsantum Haji. And again, I mentioned this, and Imam Al-Sajjad went through so much, you mentioned how some people go through depression just remembering, and we mentioned in the first episode that there was no meal that was served to him if he did not cry and remember the day of Ashura. And this belief of yaqeen and iman was, of course, even though the dua I think was written after Ashura, but the Imam, of course, had all this belief, because he wouldn't have gone through such tragedy and come out of it giving that beautiful speech in Kufa and Sham. And again, even Sayyidah Zainab even more, because I've heard in lectures, a woman tends to her emotional get sometimes overpower her. But Sayyidah Zainab assalamullahi alayha, she saw everything, yet again we see her sermon in the courtyard of Yazid.
You used the word saw, and it reminds me, she is a great example of this ahsan al-niyad, of this akmal al-iman, because when Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad said to her, what did you see in Karbala when your family was destroyed? Her words were what? Ma ra'aytu, I did not see illa jamila, except the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is a level of akhlaq, a level of spiritual mastery that we see in Karbala. This is where, when you look at Karbala through the lens of the Makarim Al-Akhlaq, these ideas are not just, theoretical. When you look at, inshallah, in the next episode, we'll be able to look at practical aspects such as gratitude. When you look at the way Bibi Zainab al-Islam went into sajda when she was presented with the martyred bodies of her sons, Aun and Muhammad, this thankfulness, this attitude of gratitude that she had was really an exemplification of what this dua Makarim Al-Akhlaq can show about what a human being can achieve.
Thank you very much, Haji Ghulam Abbas. Sadly, we have come to the end of our second episode. Inshallah, in the next episode, we will look at the external aspects of the dua. I look forward to that very much, inshallah. Again, if you've missed any of our previous episodes, you can catch them on our on-demand page, Ahlulbayt TV/on-demand. On behalf of the viewers and myself, I'd like to thank Haji Ghulam Abbas Laka once again. And inshallah, we will see you in the next show. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ahlulbayt TV, the holy household for every household.